Hi there. This is Town of Islip Supervisor Angie Carpenter here in the studios of 103.9 Long Island News Radio at Long Island MacArthur Airport, and delighted to be here today with our very special guest, Frank Romeo. Frank, I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Angie.
Frank's got an incredible story that he's willing to come on the show today and share with us, and we're very, very grateful for that and for all that you've been doing to raise awareness to the issue of PTSD. And so, first of all, I would just like you, if you don't mind, to share a little bit of your story. And you're a veteran, and tell us about what it was like, you know, as a young person joining the service.
Well, it was, there were different times. And we grew up during wartime. And in fact, when I talk to students, I try to get them to understand we're very similar. They're growing up during wartime. Everything was about war in the 60s. There was so much going on. I mean, we walked on the moon and the Woodstock and Vietnam, and it was just every day, literally, it seemed like the world was changing, but, not by the day, but by the hour. There was so many things going on.
Yeah.
And so growing up, and of course we grew up during wartime, you had your choice of going to college at the time or going into the military, and I wasn't going to college, so there I found myself as an 18 years old fighting in the jungles of Southeast Asia.
Wow. So were you in the Army?
I was in the Army, yes, the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. It was kind of a unique unit. It was only in existence for 4 years. We were the prototype of today's elite units. We were air mobile. It was designed for the new type of warfare, for jungle warfare. So we were the guys that jumped out of helicopters and went into full-fledged firefights to give everybody support help. We never had a base camp. So literally at 18 years old, I was living in the jungles of Southeast Asia.
I just can't imagine, as a parent, a grandparent now, what your family must have endured. At 18 years old, you announced that you're going into the Army, and like you shared, it was wartime. All of this was going on.
Yeah. And it was a time where, we had the anti-war movement going on. Yeah. So, your parents were torn, and half the country was against it and half the country was promoting it. And it was such, we hadn't been this divided since the Great Civil War at that time. It was really like that. It was just, who was against who. And then at 18 years old, you find yourself, one day you're sitting in a classroom and the next day you're sitting in the jungle. And,
wow.
And, you're flying by the seat of your pants. There were no guidelines. People don't realize that the cell phones and computers weren't invented, so how,
and I don't even think fax machines at that point,
no. And so, how do you find your way around a jungle where you can't even see the sky? And it was bizarre. It was bizarre to say the least. It really, really had
to be.
Yeah.
So as you say, one day you're in a classroom and next thing you're, raising your hand and being sworn in into the Army. Where did you do basic training?
Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
South Carolina.
So I was inducted. Yeah.
I mean, where did you grow up? Where
Long Island.
So Long Island. So Long Island to South Carolina that many years ago, that in itself is a culture shock.
Yes. And then you go through basic training. Everyone went through basic training. They break you down. They build you into a soldier. And then on graduation day, they give out the orders. And some guys went to flight school, and some guys went to officer training. Some guys went to learn how to be clerks and cooks. Well, they gave me my duffel bag, and I walked across the base to a mock Vietnamese village. And that was where I lived for the next 8 weeks.
Wow.
Perform, search and destroy, and learning how to do those the things that.
So was that? Do you just randomly get assigned, or did you sign up for that?
I always wondered, especially in my education programs, how do you decide who's supposed to shoot the gun and who's supposed to be the clerk?
Right.
And I always wondered how they determine that. And there were times when I was in conflict and I was in a firefight, and I looked at the guy next to me, and I said to myself, he should be a preacher. He shouldn't be here.
Wow.
I was a street kid. I was a tough kid, but life dealt its blow to me also. But there are people that just should not be in the military, and how we decide who goes and who stays is really always been a question in my.
So how many years ago now was that?
50.
All right, so that was
over
50 years ago.
51, 52 years ago.
Would you agree, hopefully, that in that 50 years, things have changed, and when people are deployed or placed, that there is more thought and care given to who really is, fit to serve in various capacities?
I believe so. I believe that back then the National Guard was not used. It was a draft. So you were going one way or the other. So the National Guard was stateside. They weren't used to fight. So then people don't realize when we deploy a National Guard unit, they've been in the National Guard for X amount of years. They're being paid every month to be in the National Guard for 2 weeks out of the year to go to training, make sure they're up to par. And so they have the training to go in. At that point, I believe they should decide who should be there and who shouldn't. I don't think they do, but that's my opinion. I think we should pay more attention. We have such serious issues with young men coming home that we're doing something wrong. I argue the point of what we're doing is working, because we wouldn't have 22 suicides a day. We really have some serious problems. So we have to decide who should be there and who shouldn't.
And you mentioned the 22 suicides a day, and we'll probably touch on that a little bit more, but that is a staggering statistic that, has just really been publicized, if you will, or there's been some education about it recently. But that's the 22 that succeeded in the suicides, and it doesn't talk to the numbers that attempt and aren't,
those
able
are the
to
success rates. And which is really sad to realize that probably for every one there's another 100 that attempted it and failed. And and then we have the living dead, the walking dead, the people, the young veterans that are drugging and drinking themselves to death slowly, self-medicating and haven't come forward for treatment. So we have those statistics. Exponentially, we have no numbers, really clear numbers as to who's suffering out there. We just know it's not good. And
you see it. There be areas of the county, of the town, where you'll see a homeless, population, or where, those that obviously are homeless are hanging out, if you will. And more times than not, I would guess they are veterans.
You'd be surprised.
Sad to say.
You'd be surprised. 1 in 4 homeless is a veteran in this country. We have 50,000 homeless veterans in this country as we speak now, today.
It is a staggering statistic, and it's a heart-wrenching problem to think that these, for the most part, men, some women, but mostly men, who have chosen to serve our country, and come home. What are we doing? What are we doing to say thank you? What are we doing to say, we need to be there for you when you return, and make sure that you can assimilate back into what we like to think of a normal society and everyday life.
Yes.
And there are organizations that are out there that do address some of the issues. I know the Salvation Army has a veterans population in Northport, or did. The Beacon House. There's a lot of organizations that are finally starting to address the issue.
Correct. But around the state, we have an issue around the state, and I've stayed in shelters around the state and how they address it. And there's a lot of differences to different organizations and how they approach it. And we need to have some kind of a unit type, an interacting and a woven type of unit throughout New York State. I'm speaking on behalf of New York State because that's where I do most of my work, and so that's what I'm finding, that we need to communicate better.
And it needs to be addressed, on a regional level. You can't just have these pockets operating in a silo. I think we need to look at the issue globally and pool our resources and work together to hopefully effectuate positive change.
Yes, absolutely.
We're going to be hearing a little bit more about it, so we'd ask that you stay with us on Supervisor Spotlight as we're here today with Frank Romeo. to Supervisor Spotlight. I'm Angie Carpenter, Town of Islip Supervisor, here in the studios of 103.9 Long Island News Radio at our wonderful Long Island MacArthur Airport. And with us today, we have Frank Romeo, who is a veteran and a gentleman who is so committed to making a difference for our veterans every single day and raising awareness to the issue of PTSD, TD. And he did that dramatically recently with a walk across the state of New York. So the walk with Frank, and I didn't bring my hat with me today. I should have. But talk about that, Frank. What made you say, I've got to really do this?
Yeah, I've been advocating for 30 years. When I came to terms with my trauma, I'm 100% PTSD as rated from the government for over 50 years.
Let's tell everybody who might not know.
Okay.
We're talking post-traumatic stress syndrome.
So the government has a rating system as far as your abilities to work and what's wrong with you coming out of the military as opposed to when you went in. And so when I came out, they immediately gave me 100% for my trauma and what happened to me and dealing with my PTSD. Of course, there was no such thing as PTSD then. Mm-hmm. It was called shell shock. It was called Vietnam War syndrome, depressive neurosis. They had no concept. When the Vietnam War ended, millions of soldiers came home, and the government really didn't know what to do with them. And basically, the red flag kept going up in the 60s and early 70s. We have nightmares, we have trauma, we can't talk to people, all these different things, and that red flag went up, and it went up for decades until finally, we did not have PTSD until the early 90s. In the 80s, Congress commissioned a study that took 10 years, and in the early 90s, the American Psychiatric Association stepped in, took Vietnam War syndrome, which encompassed all these conditions, and renamed it and put parameters for its diagnosis and treatment, and called it post-traumatic stress disorder, or what we associate today as PTSD. Mm-hmm. So I've been advocating for that. When I came to terms with my trauma 30 years ago, I realized the importance of it. So before it was even PTSD, I was out there advocating. I was traveling around the country. I was talking to school districts. I was talking to students going into the military. Mm-hmm. So I was basically a one-man army. I hate to use that term because we're talking about the military, but I was out on my own, and I've been doing it for 30 years. There came time in my life, I'm 70 years old now, it came time in my life that I needed awareness. I needed to bring this to the attention of the public. So I decided to take one of my education programs, which had been based on a previous program several years ago, to learn more about PTSD. I went back to Southeast Asia, and I lived in the jungles and rice paddies all over again. And I wrote a daily blog and a story where students in America followed me as a lesson plan. And when it was feasible, I would literally Skype from the jungles of Southeast Asia right into classrooms of America. And that was my first education program, and it was a success. So Walk with Frank was modeled after that. So I decided to raise attention. I was going to walk across New York State. I was going to start in Niagara Falls in February and reach the town of Islip by June. So the reason for walking during the cold, I had to finish before the end of the school year because it was an education program.
Right. So how many miles?
Oh God, we really lost track because I got off the trail many times to be driven to homeless shelters and the VA. So overall, we covered over at least 750 miles.
Wow,
overall.
That is remarkable.
Yeah. It was 3.5 months on the road, and I lived in homeless shelters. I visited many outreach programs. I sat in on group therapy. The VA, the Veterans Administration, actually asked me to speak regionally, and they streamed my presentation live from Buffalo throughout the VA healthcare system. I spoke in Albany. When I got to walk into Albany, I got asked to speak out on the Senate floor to the General Assembly about veterans issues and about education. And I wound up with you and Bayshore High School.
Yeah, where the journey ended, but it really didn't end. It goes on.
It goes on.
It goes on.
Yeah.
And, Frank came and visited us at Town Hall, and it gave us an opportunity to, again, hopefully raise some more awareness. And it was a very, very moving moment for me and those that were there at the town board room that day, to know that someone themselves, of your own, volition, are going out there trying to make a difference. And you are making a difference. You are making a difference.
Hopefully, I approach it as being a survivor. I talk to young veterans as going from the mentality of being a victim, because a lot of them think they're victims, and then going to the survivor mentality. And I envision myself, I present myself as a PTSD survivor. And so I speak to people at that level. So I'm not a doctor or clinician, but yet people listen to me only because I've gone through the stages and the learning stages, in real life situations. And the young veterans, I talk to them and I tell them the stages, what, denial and the nightmares, the dreams and all of that, going right up until, embracing it. And that's really how I got started to make that change, when I learned to embrace it and to use it and to turn it around. And that's what I've been doing now for 30 years.
And to talk to somebody who has been through it, and obviously now is dealing with it on a whole different level, having accepted it, having made positive, strides in your life, and now you're helping others deal with it and embrace what it is and move forward and make a positive difference.
That's the difference. It's that feeling of hopelessness and that going to a positive direction.
Right.
That negative
woe
to a
is
positive.
me, woe is me,
Exactly.
poor me. But,
Exactly.
You were there. You can say to them, yeah, I know how you feel.
Exactly.
To have someone say to you, but I was there. It's easy to say, whatever the situation is that someone's going through something. Oh, I feel bad for you. I'm sure that is tough. I know how you feel. Well, you don't know how I feel unless you've really been through it. To hear it from you.
Yeah.
And you are so genuine. There's no airs. There's no pretenses.
I'm just grateful to be able to do this, to be honest with you. I wake up every day, sometimes I can't wait to wake up and get started. And it wasn't always like that.
Yeah.
And the young veterans don't realize that. And I just had this conversation earlier today that I went back to Southeast Asia, but I say to young veterans, imagine going back to Iraq and Afghanistan 50 years from now, and it's a tourist attraction. People want to see where Americans fought and died.
Yeah.
Because if you told me that 50 years ago about Saigon, I would say, there's no way I would ever.
You wouldn't believe
it. And they
it.
can't understand that. So trying to wrap their minds around, okay, yes, we're going to get from A to B, but how we do it, is really the important issue here. It's like embracing it. How do I move forward, and what tools do I need to move forward? And then talking to someone who's been there and has developed those tools really makes a big difference when I speak to them.
And then to be able to give them those kinds of resources and places to go.
Right.
I know that Northwell and Southside had established a clinic right there on Main Street in Bayshore.
Correct.
For veterans, and that was a number of years ago. And to understand that this is nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to be embarrassed about. It's mental health.
Right.
It's mental health, physical health, mental health. It goes hand in hand.
Exactly.
And there shouldn't be a stigma to it.
Well, you were there when I did my final speak at the high school.
Absolutely.
And I present myself as having a mental illness. I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And the stigma surrounding mental health in this country is not helping anyone, no less our veterans. So we have to attack that stigma. That's the first step we really need to do in education, is to attack that stigma.
I think that we are making some baby steps in that direction.
Absolutely.
And certainly things like what you're doing, Frank, is helping enormously to raise that awareness, to say there shouldn't be a stigma attached to it. You have an issue, you have a problem, there are remedies, you embrace them and you move forward.
We need to treat mental illness the way we treat physical illness.
Absolutely. So stay with us. We will be back. Frank is doing some marvelous things about education, and we're going to hear about it in a few moments here on Supervisor Spotlight. Thank you. to Supervisor Spotlight. I'm Angie Carpenter, Town of Islip Supervisor, here at Long Island MacArthur Airport in the studios of Long Island News Radio. And thank you, John Cracciola, who is so gracious and allow us to use the studio.
This is a wonderful place and a wonderful studio.
Isn't it great?
Islip Airport is just phenomenal.
It is. Thank you. That was an unsolicited testimonial. Thank you, Frank. We talked about you dealing with veterans when they come home and counseling and giving them that support and letting them know they're not alone and there are remedies and, all of those incredibly wonderful things. The thing that I find fascinating, too, is that on the opposite end of the spectrum, you are addressing the soldier before with some of the education programs that you've got in place. And that, I think, is totally fascinating and want you to share with our viewers and listeners.
That's correct. I was on the front cover of literally every newspaper between Buffalo and Newsday. But what was going on behind the scenes that they didn't write about, I spoke at 24 high schools along the way. I spoke about a curriculum based on reality-based education. So I visited these school districts, and they endorse it. They embrace it. When I Skyped students into Albany to meet our elected officials from the classroom, one student, and I couldn't have scripted better if I wrote it, actually said, I don't really care how many people died at the Battle of the Bulge. I don't care. But bringing a survivor to the Battle of the Bulge, now you have my attention.
Yeah.
And he actually said, anything I need to know, I go online. So reality-based education, we have a natural resource in this country that we are not utilizing, and that's living history. We have veterans from literally World War II on, the younger veterans today. My approach is to start a conversation about PTSD, about the realities of our country, about the realities of war, suicide, and infuse it into mainstream curriculum. So I've developed a curriculum called The Experience of the American Soldier. It was piloted by Bayshore School District. It's in its second year now. And I brought this across the state with me during my walk. And high schools across the state embraced it. This is actually going to spread. It's a curriculum that spends a little less time on the battle and a little more time on the soldier that's in the battle. We're going to learn about the battle, but we're going to give it that personal touch. We're going to learn who the soldier is. What is a soldier?
Oh my God, that has to make such a difference.
Yeah,
that's huge.
And it gives that student. It lays the foundation for future veterans. Number one, it shows students. It teaches them what is a soldier, what is a veteran, and in the sacrifices. It gives them a sense of country, and it's been in existence for 2 years. So on my walk, as I said, I got to Albany, and finally I get the attention of Albany. And this fall, a group of senators and assemblymen got together, and there's actually going to be a bill proposed in next year's education budget.
Wow.
A Walk with Frank budget, a 2-year pilot project for the experience of the American soldier. And I will be going, instead of walking, I'll be driving this time. And I'll be visiting...
Much kinder on the feet.
Right. And I'll be visiting high schools all over New York State. I'll be presenting the curriculum. I'll be introducing the curriculum. And I'll be documenting. I'll have them fill out questionnaires. I'll have them respond to it. And in 2 years, I'll go back to the Senate and present my findings as to how it's working.
And it all started here in the town of Islip, in the hamlet of Bayshore.
It absolutely did.
And I know that you worked with the superintendent there, Joe Bond, who's an incredible gentleman, and that district has been very forward-thinking for many, many years. I know that our college credit program with Suffolk County Community College started in Bayshore when I was in the legislature, and it has spread now to countless districts in Suffolk County, where children who might never have thought of going to college can experience what it's like to be sitting in a classroom on a college campus and realize that college is within their grasp, that they have the community college. And that first year that we did it, there were about 40 students that had enrolled, and 37 of them signed up for college.
Yes.
So, and these were kids that had never, ever, just wasn't anything they ever thought about.
Yeah.
So,
Bayshore has stood behind me, has advocated for me. Joe Bond, on my walk, reached out to 75 individual superintendents in New York State and laid the foundation for me to walk into their schools and present, while on my walk, and present to them the curriculum and talk about my experiences and talk about post-trauma and talk about some of the issues of our veterans. It's a win-win. And in this, I've spoken now. I am now in the process of talking to our veterans organizations, the American Legions, VFWs, the AMVETS. Their numbers are dwindling because, frankly, there's nothing for the younger veterans there. We have something for the younger veterans. I'm approaching them to infuse the younger veterans. I'm going to be advertising for young veterans to be a part of this education program in every county in New York State.
Can you imagine the positive outcomes with young returning veterans in a classroom?
Yeah.
Talking about their experiences.
It's so exciting.
It is. That really is.
And it's a win-win. It helps them to assimilate. It helps them. It gives them a forum to get their feelings and emotions out. We educate our students at the same time. So this curriculum is twofold. It's about the veteran, it's about the foundation of future veterans, and it's about our students, and infusing both together in one program.
And I see the added benefit of building the ranks of our dwindling veterans organizations,
Absolutely.
the AMVETS, the American
Absolutely.
Legion,
Yeah.
the VFWs, all of them,
Yes.
who do an incredible job in our communities. But you see the numbers dwindling.
Oneonta, for instance, when I walked through Oneonta, all three organizations, AMVETS, American Legions, and the VFW, joined forces because the numbers were dwindling.
Oh,
and
wow.
they just called it the Veterans Club in Oneonta, New York. And
Wow.
so these are the things I found throughout the state. We need to change that. We need to have something for them. Even if we change the look of it, it's up to them now. Once I think we give them a venue to talk and to come forward and step out of the shadows and give them their time in history, so to speak, I think it's going to turn around. And this education program is going to do that.
And I think those young veterans, too, rather than, trying to recruit them to go hang out at the local American Legion on a Friday night, you're giving them a sense of purpose in reaching out to young students.
Yeah.
And they, too, I think, will then see the value of how important it is to keep organizations like the Legion and VFW and all going.
Absolutely.
In fact, the American Legion this year is celebrating their 100th anniversary.
Correct.
And we want to make sure they're here to celebrate their 200th.
Exactly. And I've spoken to numerous elected officials throughout the state. On my walk, I visited each county. Before the walk, I visited each county. 25 separate counties I visited twice before the walk. So 3 times. And I made sure I touched base with every elected official in that county and the surrounding counties. And so they're on board. We have a lot of people on board. So this may be a change. This is the first of its kind in this country, coming out of Islip Township, the first curriculum of its kind in the country in existence, being piloted and now going to the state legislature.
And that's really amazing because it's not easy to have curriculum changed.
My God.
They're very,
you know how many people tell me how up against it I am?
Yep.
I had to walk.
But you're doing it.
I had to walk.
You're doing it.
The old man had to walk in freezing cold.
So listen, I want to just share with our viewers something. We kind of surprised Frank at the town board. Steve Castleton, who works with the Jets and other organizations to promote veterans and veterans issues and really laud our veterans. They have an incredible game where this year it's the Giants and the Jets that are playing.
Correct.
And they bring the American flag out onto the field, and it's being held by emergency responders and veterans. And our Frank is going to be one of them.
I'm going to be there.
Flag.
I've been invited. I'm going to be actually out on the field during halftime, November 10th, the Jet-Giant game. Watch for me.
We
I'll be
are
waving.
absolutely going to be watching and just so grateful for you. One of the saints among us in the wonderful town of Islip. We thank you for watching, and thank you, Frank, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.